Radnor Planning Commission meeting. We're just getting ourselves. Sorry about that. Again, good evening. Welcome to the October 2011 meeting of the Radnor Planning Commission. We're just reorganizing seats here. Welcome. We have a very light agenda, so we're going to jump right in, starting with the minutes for the September 6th, 2011 meeting. If you remember, we had two meetings. We have two sets of minutes to approve. Let's do them one at a time. We'll start with September 6th. Any comments? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve. Second.
And second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Second would be the minutes for September 13th, 2011. Any comments? If none, a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thanks. Skip. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. And the only thing we officially have on the agenda tonight is a discussion on the recommendations to the Board of Commissioners for the amendment to the zoning code regarding bed and breakfasts. That is on the last page. Peter is not here yet. We're expecting him. But why don't we jump in? I assume everyone's had a chance to read these, and I'll open it up at this point. This is the first time we've seen this, correct? And we'll just take a look at it, see if we have any comments. I'll open it right up to the board for any comments.
I had one on F with regard to off-street parking requirements. It says that minimum off-street parking requirements shall be provided such that one parking space is provided per guest unit or guest room. Stacked parking where one car parks behind the other, essentially blocking it, is acceptable. All parking areas shall be paved and gavelled. All they do is say one per unit. They don't say anything about the number of houses or parking spots that are required for the house. So I think we should also have that in addition to whatever is required for the household itself in that particular zoning area.
Household meaning the common area and whoever owns it.
Yeah,
The owners-
I think there's, we could check and see in certain zoning districts, a certain amount of parking is required, for example, in townhouses or something like that.
In the draft or in the sample ordinances that we received last month, there was an allowance for the parking that was required for the residents, depending on the district, the zoning district with which it resided, plus the one per guest unit. So we do need to add that back in.
I think we need to say
We need
plus.
that back in.
Yeah, I think it's a minimum of two.
I think it should be more than just one per house, one per rental room in there. In addition to what the family requires, there could also be an employee.
Right, those were
So-
all in the drafts, in the samples,
So I think
we need to add that back
we
in.
need to also add one per employee, one per each room, plus whatever's required in that zoning area for the parking.
Let me ask Peter a question. Peter, I know you just walked in. We're looking at this ordinance for the bed and breakfast, and there was some language in the drafts that we're not seeing here tonight. Do you know what transpired between those drafts and what we're looking at tonight?
Not specifically, no.
Okay.
The only one I have seen is one that you guys have reviewed tonight. I do have the file with older drafts here. I do believe they're members of the, of the township, and I think some of the commissioners might have seen this before it got forwarded to you.
Okay.
And discussed, but I can't explain specifically why some things were taken out if they're missing now.
Not a problem. So on F, we have a recommendation then to add for residents parking plus potentially employee, plus employees.
Plus one spot for employee. And also on H, I was wondering why the magic number of 1,000 feet. Because, for example, if you're in R3, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look it up. The number of front footage you need for R3 minimum. In an area, for example, if this were to happen in downtown Wayne, in some of the old big historic houses, and those houses seem to be an ideal situation for something like this to happen in order to maintain the house. should we do something other than 1,000 feet? Is 1,000 what is used in student housing? Or should it be a certain number of houses, a certain number of properties? I'm not necessarily against the 1,000 feet, but I was wondering why
it came
1,000?
about.
Well, it says except within. So within historic districts, they can.
Okay,
Yeah, so I think it was
You're
just
okay.
outside of that.
all right.
Okay.
The only other small comment I would make is regarding J, the use of any on-site amenities. Again, we want to allow for the homeowner and the residents of the house to be able to use
Use your
the
own pool?
amenities, to use the amenities themselves. Whereas this is just restricted to the use, so we need to add that back in. And D, we touched on this a little bit, the notion of, I don't think that we wanted to start the notion of a liquor license or anything, so no alcohol could be for sale, or do we want to specifically limit them to breakfast and afternoon tea in terms of what's served at the bed and breakfast?
It might be self-limiting, at least as to breakfast, with regard to alcohol, but I guess the tea would be the gray spot.
Right.
Depends what you serve with tea.
Well, again, it's a situation where I don't necessarily, I'm trying to think about how can we just cover ourselves that they don't have
Put
to
it
have a
in.
liquor license, but no alcohol can be sold.
But they're not selling it.
Perhaps, if you want
Yeah.
to if they happen to serve alcohol with afternoon tea.
There's a major limiting factor with liquor licenses, from my background. Unless you have a restaurant or a food area where you have like 28 seats or something, you can't have a license.
Right, so as long
they-
as the alcohol's not served,
But-
sold,
Not sold.
It's
Not
not
sold.
sold, yeah.
then
But
it's
do
just
also-
like
do we
having a
think
private
that's-
residence, right?
Yeah.
What?
Is it just like having a private, Peter, is
No,
this just like
it's-
having a
no.
private residence?
No, they would have to have a license to serve
Yeah.
their guests. These are paying guests, and they can't say, well, we're not charging them specifically for the alcohol. I don't think that they can get around not having a license that way.
So then we just need to limit it to breakfast and afternoon tea?
I
and
suspect
leave out
so.
alcohol.
And to add on what Skip was saying, in most municipalities I deal with, liquor licenses. I mean, you're going to be spending $250,000 plus on getting one of these licenses. It's not something that a small bed and breakfast, unless they're insane.
To speak to that, actually, the price has gone down considerably because the licenses can now move freely within an entire town.
Right.
But that being said, it's still probably $80,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
So do we need to say, you think then?
No,
Not
then it
served?
sounds like it's going to be self-limiting.
Yeah. And
But I'm wondering if that's also too restrictive to say breakfast and afternoon tea may be served. I mean, suppose there's a group staying there who calls in advance and says, can you make us dinner one night? I mean, what's wrong with that? How does that hurt the township?
Lunch.
What's wrong with lunch? It may not, normally, typically, bed and breakfast serve breakfast, and they will have snacks available. Maybe that's what we're thinking of the afternoon tea. But I don't think there'd be a problem if they wanted to serve somebody lunch. Or
Yeah, as
dinner.
long as it's serving to the guests who could do it.
Only
why
to
do
the
we care,
guests who
right?
are staying in the.
Yeah.
I think the fear is that it could slowly grow and morph into something a little more intensive than a sleepy bed and breakfast.
Oh, that was the conversation. It was about not letting this creep into small wedding reception type things. But I thought that we had an allowance, there should be D, that there shall be no meals served to the general public. Maybe if we added in wording that, meals can only be served to guests, staying at the bread and breakfast. So you can't have, that was how we were going to avoid small function.
That would do it, yeah.
Establishments.
So meals may be served to guests of the bed and breakfast.
Right, the
opposed to
general
breakfast
public,
and
invited, guests staying there as opposed to the general public
Right.
makes it even more clear that it's.
Overnight guests.
Right, exactly. Oh, overnight guests, that's right.
Right.
Because anybody who shows up is a guest.
Right, overnight guests.
I had a
So,
couple of questions.
Let me just get that straight. What you're recommending is to eliminate the second sentence and just say meals may be served to guests?
To
without a
overnight
limit-
guests.
Overnight guests, without a limitation on what type of meal is being served?
Yes.
Okay.
In A, I just had a question about the language. Accessory use to a single-family house and shall be subordinate to the residential use of the premises. What do we mean by that? Do we mean, I could imagine that the bed and breakfast area is going to be larger than whatever the homeowner's living in. I mean, if you're living in a basically 4 or 5 bedroom portion of your home, but then you have a lot of other rooms you're renting out, is that subordinate? Are we talking about area? Are we talking about?
It's subjective. There's actually a lot of case law out there, court cases, that look at principal uses and accessory uses, and which one is subordinate to the other, and the relationship between the two. I think what's going on here is you don't want someone to set up a 15-room hotel and have one room that's their residence and say, oh, it's a bed and breakfast. You need to really have a true kind of home atmosphere, living area for the owners, and then the rooms are added on to that instead of, basically it's clearly a inn or hotel where the owner is residing at that inn or hotel.
Well, I agree with you completely that that's what we want, but how are we saying that? I mean, how are we going to?
Well,
I think it's awkward the way it's worded.
I think what we're relying on is the way it's said. That's a very classic legalese phrase on dealing with these situations, and there's a lot of case law out there. I mean, you can certainly tighten it up. The problem is the tighter you make it, the more likely you're going to get people coming in that don't match that little preconceived notion of what should be a bed and breakfast. And then we'll be sitting here, or the administration will be sitting here thinking, oh, this is perfect, but unfortunately they don't meet it. They're going to have to go get variances. It's the conundrum. You can make it tighter, but then you're going to exclude more people. By keeping it loose, yeah, something might slip through the cracks, or it might be open to interpretation.
And the common legal definitions that you're aware of don't imply that this is subordinate means space, like the amount of space.
No, yeah, and in some ways it doesn't mean the amount of space.
Okay.
No.
Do you think we should add in that one there about the bed and breakfast home shall be operated by the homeowner and plus one employee at that point?
It's better to say homeowner.
Or maybe they may have one employee.
Well, they
Well,
could have
we're
an
not saying
outside
that anywhere
contractor.
here.
They
could
may
an
have 2
outside
employees or an outside
cleaning
contractor.
service. I don't think you really want an employee.
I mean, you're probably going to have somebody working in the
I
kitchen.
could, I could see an employee for cleaning and cooking. Well,
Then
Yeah, but why
how
would
close
we
do you
wanna-
get to a hotel?
that's not a hotel.
Well,
I mean, there's some
it's a-
homes that have that.
Yeah.
Why do we want to restrict, why do we want to dictate to them how they're going to operate their business?
Well, we don't. I'm just thinking of what ifs type of situation.
Peter?
But aren't they allowed to have an employee the way it's written now? Is that your concern? They're not allowed?
Well, it's not addressed to that it's
It's not addressed.
Yeah, it's not, and in home occupations.
So it is allowed?
there's-
Yes.
Because we
Right.
don't exclude it.
Yes, and I think it should be allowed.
That's the way it should be, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So you don't want to
For
mention
instance,
it
if
at all?
I had a bed and breakfast, I
No.
would need help.
All right.
Well, one of the ordinances that we looked, that was given to us as an example, they would allow up to 1 or possibly 2 employees, but not like 20. Now, is that correct? One of the
Yeah,
model ordinances?
usually in these home-based businesses, there usually is a limitation on the number of employees, once again, to make sure it doesn't morph into something much more intense that should be in a residential area.
Then do we want to limit?
Home occupations limit the number of employees.
Yeah, to
Doesn't
what?
subordinate kind of limit it? I mean, if you have 10 or 20 employees,
Yeah.
you're not subordinate any longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Possibly. I mean, I'm just saying normally you do see either it says no outside employees or 1 or 2 or 3 outside employees in these sorts of situations where you have a business in with a residence.
And I'd rather not specify that. I mean, I don't want to say you can only have 1 employee just because of the idea we want to keep it simple. Because what if instead of 1 full-time person, you've got 6 teenagers coming in to clean up after, I don't think we need to be that specific.
The one thing if you're going to allow employees, I know you mentioned you want additional parking for a residence. You're probably going to want additional parking for the employees if you're allowing that.
We were going to
had
put
that,
that
yeah,
in.
we added that.
Okay.
But let me ask, because of the definition for bed and breakfast home, do we need to clarify, where it says an owner-occupied single-family house, we don't need to include in A, the bed and breakfast home shall be operated and occupied by the homeowner, right? Because we're covered in the definition?
Well, I think it's okay to say it again.
Yeah.
Say it again.
I
Not
think
a
you're always
problem.
better.
But- and then
So
the
not
other-
contradicting.
Right. The other thing about that definition is that in the definition, we've specifically stated that breakfast is provided, but in D, we're being a little bit more expansive in the meals, so we need to think about the definition. We've restricted it within the definition of bed and breakfast home, and then we're allowing for something more under D, if, in our suggested expansion.
Well, then we have to look at E also, because E conflicts with D then. Because the second sentence in
Yes.
E talks about food served to guests
Right.
on the premises should be limited to breakfast and afternoon tea only. So you want to take that out?
You know, I think
just covered it in D.
practically
covered
speaking,
it.
afternoon tea is probably a loose enough term that we could leave it at afternoon tea. And if that turns out to be lunch one day for one set of guests, and it's tea and crackers and cheese for another guest. I mean, unless we think there's going to be a mad influx of bed and breakfasts in Radnor, all looking to, really create a restaurant base, we're probably going to be okay with this for a
Yeah, but
while.
E directly conflicts with D, so.
No, it does.
So let's just drop what's in E or modify or make it, I'd prefer to drop it.
Well,
We
the
already
thing-
stated it once. We
The
don't-
thing you need in E is the part about there shall be no separate kitchen or cooking facility in the
Yep.
guest rooms.
Right.
Although, again, I'd like to alternate that. I think you should need to have the option of having those many refrigerators. Because I've been in bed and breakfast, they have little refrigerators in the rooms.
Yeah, but would
Is
you
that
call
a
the
It's not a
refrigerator a kitchen?
Is it a kitchen device?
It's a kitchen facility.
Well, it's not a separate kitchen or cooking.
It's not a cooking facility.
So you don't think that would be
Yeah, I think
an
you
No,
issue?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So drop the language.
So drop that one
Drop the
sentence.
second sentence, you mean,
After
Yep.
keep the first sentence.
and the last sentence.
Okay, of which one? Of D or V?
E.
We're on E.
Okay, I think we should
I-
keep
I
the
don't-
first sentence.
I think you should keep the first, yeah.
Take the
Yeah.
second sentence out
Right.
and move the third sentence to the end of D.
Say that again.
Keep the first sentence, remove
Yeah.
the second sentence, and take the all food service sentence and put that at the end of D.
Why don't we just put it all in D?
Make it all D.
E and D together.
Okay,
Doug, you may have missed, what we're talking about in D is, it would read that there shall be no meals served to the general public.
right.
Period. Meals may be served to overnight guests of a bed and breakfast home.
Okay.
Okay, taking out the words breakfast and afternoon tea, not limiting, just in case they want to serve breakfast or lunch, as long as it's to their guests and not any outside guests. I think that's what we were talking about. Now the question is, do we just continue and say there should be no separate kitchen or cooking facility in any guest room? All food service shall comply with federal, state, and county regulations for the preparation, handling, or serving of food. Sounds like one item
fine.
to me.
Yeah.
I think I like Steve's suggestion there.
But by taking out the no separate kitchen or cooking,
That stays
No,
in.
we're leaving it in. We're leaving it in.
oh, you're leaving that in?
Yeah, we're leaving
Just-
this-
You're just
taking
taking out
it-
the food.
The food
Stays.
portion.
It just goes to
Oh.
We're striking the second sentence.
I was going to ask if somebody wanted coffee in the afternoon, so.
No, that would be covered, that would be fine.
But then we still have, Susan had brought up the conflict now with the definition.
That definition of bed and breakfast?
Yeah.
It says with breakfast provided.
Right.
I would just say with meals.
For short-term.
I'm
Now,
not sure that we should necessarily get away from the bed and breakfast, because they're known as bed and
What they're
breakfasts.
known as, yeah.
I think if breakfast is a loose enough term, that it could be brunch, it could be, and tea
Teas.
could turn into something more elaborate. And if once or twice a year, the owner should happen to serve a meal, who would know and what's the big deal?
Well, but it, also, I agree with Kathy, but for the definition, it says breakfast is provided. It doesn't say you can't provide lunch or dinner. It just says you're providing breakfast.
I think you're okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
How about I? I thought 14 days was kind of long.
Yeah, so did I.
Kind of defeats the purpose. I don't ever think of bed and breakfast more than 2 or 3 days, a long weekend. But,
Some people use them for business.
Yeah.
but isn't that exactly what you don't want?
Why?
Why? If someone wants to come, if someone's working at
Because
Glaxo
in my
for
opinion,
2
Radnor
weeks-
has
Plenty of
very,
hotels.
very limited hotel rooms right now, and you're creating a business where exactly what we don't want. Somebody who has a big home right now that can convert and fill those rooms up with business people for 14 days.
Yeah, but what's wrong with it?
I don't know, is that what we're trying to do? To me,
No,
it defeats the purpose
but-
of a bed and breakfast. They become small hotels.
Well,
know.
you're limited by the number of rooms.
Are you, what, There's no limitation on the number of rooms. in
See,
this.
I don't see how it's different if there's two grandparents staying there who have come to visit their new grandchild, or a guy who's going to go to work that day. How does that affect anybody outside the building? I mean, does it?
Peter, what's been the magic number about 14?
Is the timing?
It's just that, it's the magic number.
It's a
I
matter.
mean, in most zoning ordinances regarding bed and breakfasts, inns, motels, this is the difference between a kind of a transient guest and someone who's becoming a more quasi-permanent resident.
Like a boarding house.
Yeah, boarding house
like a
or,
dorm.
a residential hotel.
But that's a standard number you're telling us?
Yeah, that's very standard.
That's it.
Related to that, and since you have these other ordinances in mind, is it appropriate for us to consider limiting the maximum number of rooms in a particular bed and breakfast?
I've seen that done, but there's no magic number there. I've seen everywhere between
says it's not
3
by the house.
up to no limitation. So that's up to you.
I'm thinking of some of the very large mansions that are around here. They could very easily have 6 or 8 rooms. There you get into having an
They
employee
have the
or
parking
2.
and
But do you have the parking?
they need that.
So you're limited by parking on that. I think, which was what we thought it might be self-limiting when we were discussing this before, rather than say a certain number per zone or limited to a certain zoning district. Because right now, it's not allowed in agricultural areas, where that may be a perfect area to have it because you have a lot of ground and a lot of bigger old houses in there. So I think if you have sufficient parking, but I'm just wondering if maybe we should, so it doesn't turn into a hotel. Maybe it should be 6
Yeah, I was thinking 6.
as max.
Sorry, 6 bedrooms plus owners?
Plus
I'm
owners.
thinking?
Yeah,
6 guest rooms.
6 guest rooms, sorry.
Now, if the 6 guest rooms is an accessory use, or do we want to specify a minimum size for the homeowner portion of it? I mean, it's not any, I mean,
No, but it has to be subordinate. We already covered that.
Yeah, in some way.
Yeah, I'd prefer to stay away from like really hamstringing them in specific numbers, with square footage or whatever.
you don't think we should max
Here's the
it?
thing, because this is special exception, the fact is they're still going to have to go to the zoning board. If there's a house that comes up as an application, and there's a neighborhood that is particularly opposed to it for whatever reasons.
all turn out.
Their protection is that this is only granted by special exception at the ZHB, which is an expensive process to go
Process
through in any event. So I don't think that we want to hamstring them, as Steve said, any more than, necessary. We're covering the bases. It's special exception. If there's a huge outcry over a particular home, that will become evident.
What do you think about the stacked parking?
Safety.
I'm not a fan of it.
I don't like stacked parking.
In this instance, I'm not a fan of it either, by the way, but in this instance, it doesn't bother me.
Why?
I just think you're talking about a low velocity type of parking. It's more not the opposite of transient. It's more home based. It doesn't move a lot. I guess it just doesn't.
Don't we all have stacked parking? I've got a really long driveway, and we play
Yeah.
shuffleboard, thank you, with
Yeah,
the
but
cars.
it's your family. If you have to get your kid in the middle of the night to move their car, you would move their car, but are you going to move a tenant's car?
But again, I'm going to leave it up to a business owner to manage how they want to do, if there's some stacked parking. I don't love it, but in these limited situations, I don't think that a business owner is going to make it where he's waking up his guests in the middle of the night. I think that they'll probably arrange their parking in such a way that the homeowner is inconvenienced, not the guests.
How about from a fire safety point of view? Where now we have 6 rooms plus an owner plus an employee. We have 8 or 9 cars stacked in a driveway, and the fire engine needs to get there, or police need to get there. We create.
Well, they would also get out of the house so they could move their
Maybe.
cars.
Maybe they can't. Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You wanna-
Yeah, I think maybe you might want to limit the amount of stacked parking, like saying no more than 30% of the parking could be stacked. And that could be the family members' cars stacked in there. Because I think it'd also be inconvenient if you had 3 or 4 guest rooms there, and guest 1 is the first one in, but he has to be the first one out in the morning.
Peter, how did stacked parking get in here? Because it wasn't in any of the samples we saw. Is that,
I don't
was
know.
that
I've never,
staff?
to be honest, I've never seen an ordinance that allows stacked parking, and I didn't have a chance to
Yeah,
ask John.
let's not allow staff.
Okay.
Well, what I don't like especially is when it says essentially blocking it in. So we're
Yeah.
kind of allowing them.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think
and-
that's good practice.
It's like a lawsuit in.
Yeah, it's also waiting to happen.
Provided.
And I
So
imagine if we
strike
just
it,
take it out,
strike it.
the homeowners may stack their cars because, you know, they may have, they're
Let
going to have a
them
separate
figure it out.
garage,
Yes,
they're going to
yes.
have a
Yeah.
regular driveway like everybody else or whatever. But they're not going to run their business like that. So I think we could take it out.
Yeah, I think you'll take it out. We'll take a look at it. On a
Somewhere in there,
case-by-case.
we're adding about the +1 space per employee. Did we
Right,
put that in there?
right.
Okay.
In F, we're planning on adding plus residents, plus the 1 employee.
What did we decide about the 1,000 feet in H? We touched on that.
I think we said
Can
as
we
long
go
as
back that
accept the
stack?
township.
Are we going to say stack parking is unacceptable?
Just don't
Just
put
take
it
it
in.
out.
Just don't mention it.
Take it out.
Take out that sentence.
Okay.
But also,
Personally, I-
it doesn't say anything there about requiring an off-street parking space for employees.
We're adding that.
We're gonna
Sorry,
add that.
Doug. You walked in a couple minutes late. Let me just go back. Right now, where we're at is no change to A, no change to B, no change to C. D and E would be merged to read that there will be no meals served to the general public. Meals may be served to overnight guests of the bed and breakfast home. There should be no separate kitchen or cooking facility in any guest room. All food service shall comply with federal, state, and county regulations for the preparation, handling, and serving of food. That would now be D. E would then be, the minimum off-street parking requirements shall be provided such that 1 parking space is provided per guest, unit, or guest room, plus residents and employee. The stacked parking line would be
I
the
think,
structure.
no,
Go ahead.
we need to, what I said was all parking areas, well, no, I said, after they said 1 per rental room, I said plus 3 more, thinking that 2 for the homeowners and 1 for an employee. But I think it's better to say plus 1 per employee. Plus 2 for homeowners, plus 1 per employee minimum.
I don't think we should say 2 for homeowners. I think they should be required to have for the homeowners' use whatever that district requires. Because each township district is different
And all these other requirements would be in addition.
and needs to be in
Okay.
addition to what would be
Then we need
required
to say
anyway.
that.
Okay.
In addition to
Whatever's already
the
required.
regular residential home parking requirements.
plus
And also put in there
residential
plus
parking
1 per employee.
For instance, I think
code.
in our district, we have to have 4 because we have to have 2 plus everybody's got a garage.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So
So-
1 per parking spot per guest room or guest unit or guest room, plus parking for residents per
You know,
Per
existing
code.
code. Go ahead.
yeah, I
Per
was going to say,
zoning
plus the minimum required parking for the zoning district.
Yeah.
Plus 1
Plus 1
per employee.
per full-time, that would have to be like full-time employee.
Per 1 space per full-time employee.
I wouldn't say full-time,
Yeah, we won't.
because it could be a part-time employee.
So then
They
G,
still
which
need a
is,
parking spot.
For
G, which
employee.
is now F, we don't have any change. H, which was now be G, we don't have any change. I, which would now be H, we don't have any change. And,
Actually,
go ahead.
B, it's very good that we're going to have health and safety codes applied to the guest room. Is that construed to mean common areas so that the access to that guest room is safe?
Well, the access, that's all going to be a building code requirement and labor and industry, because this is going to be a commercial building. There's going to be outside requirements as far as access, fire safety, all that.
I just wanted to be sure on that. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're okay there?
Well, then why do we have to say, then why do we have B if it's already covered?
Well, that's for the interior.
Let's take it into the
I,
rooms.
The rooms would not be covered under those other general
not be.
business provisions?
No, they would be. We're just being repetitive, I
Okay.
think. Yeah, and, which is quite
okay.
common.
And then, I'm sorry, J, which is now I, we added language at the end, plus homeowners use.
Restricted to use by residents of the home and guests staying at the bed and breakfast.
Nice people.
And overnight
And
guests.
guests of the residents.
Overnight guests.
I mean.
Well, no, that's where the wording gets a little tricky. You know, if you've got you want to have your own party, but they're not guest staying at the home. So residents, guests of the residents, and guests staying at the bed and breakfast.
There you go,
Non-paying guests
non-paying.
of the residents.
Okay, so that's what we have right now. Any other comments?
You want to read I to me again?
The new I, which is a J that's in front of us, would be the use of on-site amenities such as a swimming pool or tennis court shall be restricted to use by homeowner, and overnight guests staying at the bed and breakfast.
But we also want to add in the homeowner's guests.
Or is that implied?
Personal for.
See, is that implied,
Yeah, I
Peter?
think
It is to me.
because
Okay,
you're
all right.
residents, yeah.
Okay, so we'll leave it like that. Any other comments?
What zoning districts do we want this to be permitted in? Sue had brought that up before.
I thought we were going to let it go based on land space,
Yeah,
parking.
anywhere.
There's no land space in
Well,
here.
parking. Your parking is the big limiter.
But you can
It can
add
be.
like a minimum lot size. In fact, John and I talked about that
Those were
today.
the other drafts we saw, lot size.
The other drafts we saw had a minimum of an acre, which I personally think is onerous.
Yeah, you're not gonna-
Yep.
What's going to
Depends on
come?
your neighbors too, you know.
Well, that's why I think the beauty of the special exception is the protection there for the surrounding neighbors.
But just to clarify with special exception, please recognize, as a special exception, it's a permitted use. All the applicant has to do is show they meet all of the standards in the zoning ordinance. And if they meet all the standards, even if all the residents nearby hate it, even if the township hates it, the zoning hearing board has no discretion. They must grant the special exception.
Okay.
So it's not like
So
a
we-
variance, which is very hard to meet. Special exception is much easier to meet,
Okay.
and there's no discretion there.
But if
Yeah.
we were to specify a minimum lot size of an acre,
Then they'd have to meet that.
Now, here's what you have added one parking spot per rental unit, plus the family's parking spots, plus an employee parking spot. Even if they have the ground to do that, they also then have to meet impervious requirements, which are fairly strict. So all of that is really going to limit what can be done on the property. Even if it's gravel, that's considered generally, I believe by Radnor now, as impervious, because it could very easily be macadamed over.
So in agricultural R1, that's not going to be a problem. But when
It's
you
not
get,
going to be a problem.
But
If
in like
you're in R3 and
R3,
4, it's going to be a problem.
yeah, but in the historic districts, we took out the distance requirement, because we can picture that might be a place
Yeah.
where, but they're still going to have parking. So that's going to be there.
That's the
That's going to
self-limiting.
be the
Maybe then
self-limiting
they
part.
can only do 2 rooms and not 4, even though they have room for 4 on there. So the limiting thing is really going to be your area and the amount of parking that you can handle on your property.
And we talked about rooms. So do we want a minimum amount of, or maximum amount of rooms, and do we want a minimum lot size?
I'd rather not have a maximum number of rooms, because I think that this could work in a very small bed and breakfast downtown in an historic district, or it could work in a mansion. It might be a great way to save a mansion. But then by saying 6 rooms, that might be too restrictive.
But you could limit it outside of the historic districts, like you did with the distance, in terms of the size of the lot.
Well, you're limiting there. And if they went before zoning to ask for that, and they want to rent more rooms than what they have area to cover parking, then they're going to have to go for a variance.
And then it's a discussion.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
And am I correct on that?
Yeah.
If they don't
I mean,
meet all
certainly, if
criteria,
they-
they
if
then
they-
have to go for a
If
variance.
they have to get a variance, then it's a whole new ballgame
Yeah.
for them and
And it's
the
a lot
residents.
tougher.
but that does protect the public, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
from themselves. Yeah, basically.
Have a big estate that you can do it, it's going to become a mini hotel.
So what's the consensus here? You're going to limit it on the basis of, you're going to use the number of parking spaces as the vehicle by which you're going to.
Let's go back to what you just said, because it made me think, on an estate, it could turn into a hotel. That's why I think maybe we might want to consider a max on there of maybe 6.
And if you put the max in, they have to go for the variance, that's fine. So something like I'm trying to think of one.
Ardrossan,
Yeah, Ardrossan, or,
okay?
you know, someday.
Because they could handle it there.
They could
They have
handle it
plenty
there.
of room, both
If the
inside and
Willows
out.
was sold to a private, who
Yeah.
wanted to make that a bed and breakfast, probably a perfect place for them. Maybe
Yeah.
they could have 10 rooms.
But I think
that
we-
Would you
be-
call it
I think we've already
subordinate, though?
covered that, because that would not be subordinate to the residential use.
Right. I mean, it's.
A hotel is not subordinate to
Well,
a
suppose-
residence.
Well, it's
No.
not a hotel. If I have a
they have 20
10-room
bedrooms?
home,
Yeah, I could still be
I
living there.
could still say it's subordinate, and if there's a master suite, and that's the biggest bedroom or whatever, I don't know what the definition of subordinate is. I'm looking at Peter over there, and he's smiling. But I would think that if I have a 10-room mansion, that's what it is, and I'm taking the biggest suite as my bedroom, I could argue that it's still subordinate. I just happen to have 9 other bedrooms.
But I guess the question is, so, I mean, so what? Is that a problem? I mean, if a Ardrossan wants to open up 15 rooms, is that, I mean,
But
is that,
still would
are we
have to
afraid of
have
that?
The
They can
person
park.
who's
Yeah.
operating it live on it.
Yeah, I don't think you
Or
want.
it could also, they could go for a change in zoning and go for hotel.
I think you're going from at least to me, I think bed and breakfast, I think
Smaller,
small, quaint,
yeah.
short term. And all of a sudden, I don't want to give somebody, and we're not thinking of wherever the house may be, some 10-bedroom house.
I'm
and sit
saying
up
a
there.
house like
There's a guy in the
ours,
audience thinking, oh my God,
Yeah.
I got a mini hotel, it's going to be a great business.
So what
That
we're
I can rent
saying
my
is,
businessmen 14 days at a time, tell them to leave for a night, come back, and I've got a cash cow. It's exactly what we're not trying to create here.
so what we're saying is if we put in a number that limits the number
Yeah,
of
then
the
they get a
maximum
variance.
Yeah, I
units,
think max
then if
6.
somebody wants to build a small hotel, they got to go that route.
Go to the hotel.
And go
Right,
through
yeah.
the zoning and
Right.
get the hotel.
So I support that, a limit, say 6 rooms. Yeah, 6 guest rooms.
That gives people plenty of room, assuming that they have a property that can handle it.
Right.
But it's not getting so overboard that,
And they could still
Turns
take the
into a hotel.
variance route if they really want
Yeah.
to.
Peter, did you come across maximum number of rooms is there a standard?
No, not for bed and breakfasts, no. Not that I've come across.
Okay.
You haven't
6
come across
reasonable?
Any
I think
limitation?
6 sounds very reasonable, yeah. 6, 8. Oh,
Now,
yeah.
another oddball question. Suppose you have pick a 10-bedroom house and you're limited to 6, that means you've got 4 for the residents. Is that the kind of ratio that you would want? Or would you want to specify a minimum amount of space or rooms for the residential occupancy?
I don't
Why
think-
not?
I don't think you can.
That wasn't in the
We
draft.
don't want to get that limiting.
yeah. Let's say you had a family who've lived in a family home for years and years, and it's a very big home. And there are those types of homes in Radnor. The kids are all gone, and you have 6 rooms sitting there doing nothing. And you hire somebody that can help you out with it and so forth, but the husband or wife are still living there as their residents, and they need this for the extra income. They could do it on there.
Whereas if you said you had to have a minimum of 4 rooms set aside for the family, it wouldn't be viable. It might not be a viable thing.
Does a family of 2 need 4 rooms?
Well, I would say yes, but I'm a bizarre person.
But, well, no, I'm saying, and now when you refer to rooms, are you saying rooms in general or bedrooms?
I had intended bedrooms, but I see your
You're
point.
more concerned with the scenario where you have a larger building, where somebody's going to try to find a loophole. If I live in this building, I can get around the hotel code by calling it a bed and breakfast. So you want to limit that.
the rooms.
Yeah,
scenario
that's what I
more
want to
than-
limit.
Yeah, and another thing, it's not a static situation. If you have a huge lot, what prevents you from adding 4,000 square
Right.
feet?
Yeah, I think you really need to limit it, or it could get out of hand.
So just show of hands for a 6-room, in addition to the owner's bedroom. I think I'm in. Okay.
Can
Six
can I-
guest
Yeah,
rooms.
thank
Can
you.
I,
6 guest
can I just carve out the historic district?
I think that was,
You could- you
Are-
could-
are
You mean
we
they can
carved
have-
out?
You mean they can have more rooms in the historic
Yeah,
district?
I'd almost like to relax the parking requirements and this requirement in the historic district.
I wouldn't, because then you run into parking problems.
We have parking problems all
Yeah.
the time now.
Yeah, it's tight, where the lots are small and the houses are big. And,
You have,
you know,
yeah, and
you
some people
have
are going to argue they
4
have street
kids,
parking.
4
yeah.
people in the family, and you probably have 4 cars.
The historic district, is that just maybe the Wayne Business District, or what, I mean, where are
No,
the
it's
historic
all
districts?
those Victorians,
Luella
too.
Court,
Yeah.
North Wayne, South Wayne.
Village, right?
I don't know that that's an official
I don't
historic
think it's
district, but
officially
right now
historic.
it's North Wayne, so Poplar, Walnut, which there's some nice houses.
Oh, no, I wouldn't want to go in there.
South
Okay, I was
Wayne.
thinking more
No,
just the business area.
That's permitted.
South
No,
Wayne.
That's
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 permitted.
permitted?
commercial.
All right, good enough.
But I'd still stay with the 6.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with that, yeah. Good enough.
So
And
we
the
want
parking.
to add the language for
Yeah.
6
Yes, I
guest
agree.
rooms
Oh.
max.
Wait, that brings up a different question, though.
Go ahead.
The residential use of the premises, what happens if we allow for this in the WBOD? Is there a residential, or in the business, in the commercial district, do we have homes in the commercial district? And how do we have a residential use that's subordinate in a commercial district?
Well, could they just
Well,
be a hotel?
That's, no,
No, that's,
Well, got a bunch of, let me answer each of them backwards. I believe in the township, a hotel must have a minimum of 20 rooms. So that's going to be an issue. This is going to be a separate standalone use. And so if we wanted to list it in the commercial district or Wayne, the Wayne Business District, you can, just even if a independent residential use is not allowed there. Because this is not like a home occupation where you have to have the residential use allowed and then this is an accessory home occupation added onto it. This is a whole totally separate use that can be listed in each district on its own. So that could be something, if you want to list it in the commercial district or recommend that it's done, that certainly can be done even if residential use is not normally
because there would
allowed
have to be a single-family home in that commercial district to qualify for this
Yes.
use?
Yes.
Okay.
Which leads me to a question to all of you. I believe John intended this to only apply to existing buildings and not to empty lot where someone comes in and builds a brand-new building for this use specifically. Is that something that you guys are looking for or not?
So wouldn't we just say to an accessory use to an existing single-family house?
Yes.
In
But
A, we would
I wanna
add the
know
word
if you
existing.
want to add that language.
I think that's a good idea.
But what's the
However-
downside to somebody coming in and building a bed and breakfast?
But when does the existing start? For example,
Yeah, I mean, you
Yeah.
could build a house and then apply next year.
No, the way the ordinance would be written, it would be existing as of a set date.
but then again, I'm sorry to be
No, go
so
ahead.
contradictory. Let's say, a lot of these big houses that are being built or have been built the past few years that might have 6, 8 bedrooms, and they continue to be built the next few years. Let's say this takes effect this year. So any houses built after this year can't go into this type of use. Suppose somebody builds a regular old, very large residential house a year from now, 2 years from now, and 5 or 6 or 10 years down the road, they find themselves in that situation, and they want to run a bed and breakfast there. Does that mean they can't?
Yeah, I
means they
it's a good
can't.
point. And I don't know why we need to limit it to existing. I mean,
Because it's a single-family home. If it's built as a single-family home,
it meets all the requirements, it meets all the requirements.
But I think that one concern I have from what Peter was telling us is that this ordinance stands separately from the other zoning ordinances. So is this going to allow someone to build a single-family home, calling it a bed and breakfast in an area where they normally couldn't build that?
I don't know why it has to stand as a single family or as a single ordinance. Why can't this be applied to the existing codes?
It's going to be part of
Of
the zoning
each
ordinance. Yeah,
zoning
it's not going to be a
ordinance.
standalone ordinance. It's just, the ordinance, you classify a use. You have a retail use, you have a single-family
Commercial
use,
use.
you have a multifamily use, a townhome. This is going to be a bed and breakfast use. So, you can put it, you can allow this use where you wish to allow it. But I think the point, I agree that, someone might try to take advantage of it and say, oh, I want my residential home here, but I can't build it, but I can build a bed and breakfast here. I'll build a bed and breakfast, tell them in which kaput, I can't make a run at it, and then you live there. That being said, who's going to want a residential home in the middle of a commercial district?
Right.
You have to wonder.
I think the cost of construction would limit it because I don't think you'd make a killing in a bed and breakfast,
So then, that being said, I'm fine with it not
but not being mentioned at all.
not using a date for existing.
I have one concern with that. You would be in the position possibly of having someone who has a decent-sized lot in an established neighborhood, but has a very small house on it. either they would take that small house and put an addition, which is like 5 times the size of the house on the back, or if you're allowed to build new, they simply might demolish the whole thing and build a whole brand-new thing. Is that,
Well, we do have this 6-room limitation.
And
Well,
if they're
yeah,
within their rights,
but
what difference does it make if they're, I mean, they can do it anyway, right?
Yeah, they're allowed
So this is
to
going
do
to
that
cause them
now.
to do it? Is that your concern?
I'm sorry?
This would cause them to do something they wouldn't normally do? I mean, if they're allowed to do it, they're allowed to do it, right? I mean, if their ordinance allows them to do it,
They're not allowed now.
no, but I mean, if Doug is saying, I mean, if they could, if they have the room to build a structure of that size on their lot, his concern that this was going to give them the impetus to do it. This, now they can afford to do it. And, am I correct? Yeah.
But let's make sure we don't get completely twisted. I think the idea here is for, again,
I
that
think we're getting
quaint,
twisted.
that quaint building to become
Yeah.
a bed and breakfast. If we allow this in all the zoning districts and all the properties, I mean, I live on Arbordale Road with a bunch of 1960s colonials and split levels, and my neighbor says the kids have left, I'm going to rent 3 rooms. I don't think I want that on my street.
Exactly.
That's not what we're trying to do. This is for that, maybe it's only the historic districts. Maybe, and then everything else has to come in as a variance.
Or maybe
'Cause
it's
I wouldn't
only-
want this on my street,
Right.
because suddenly my neighbor's now in business.
That's what I was
And I
driving
think
at
I'm in a-
earlier.
Yeah, well, that's the NIMBY attitude, though. If you don't want it in your street, why is somebody in a historic district
Well, I'm
want it on
saying
their street?
because,
You don't have gas stations in our neighborhood either. In other words, you can.
You don't.
No,
No.
but we
Right.
can, this is a use we can decide can't be everywhere.
Then
That's what I'm
if
saying. So
you're going to
if-
do that, then you,
Not set up that way. That's
Right.
Yeah.
a different approach.
right, that's what I'm saying, I'm just saying, we're starting to drift to the point where we're going to let this in all the zoning.
I didn't say that.
Well, I'm
Well-
just bringing up that we're heading that direction, sounds like, as long as it's a big enough building, or as long as you have the parking, you can do this in any home in Radnor.
that was the original intention.
I don't know why we would ever do that, because I don't think we want to be able to tell everybody in
Well,
town they
then,
can
okay, which,
have a business in their
what
property.
zoning district, starting from R2?
I don't think it should be an R2. I don't think it
I
should be
think
on a
it's
lot
very, would
under
be
an
very
acre.
limited in R2 unless you had an oversized
I don't think it
lot.
should be on a lot under an acre.
But
That's another way to do it.
that's R1 then.
Pardon?
Yeah, that's
An
R1.
acre's R1.
Yeah, that'd be my house.
That'd be my neighborhood.
Well, and I'd be happy with 3 acres. I think some of the drafts had 3 acres. Didn't they?
But then what you're doing, for example, that house that started this whole thing, I think was about an acre, wasn't it?
Just under, I believe.
Yeah. But it was zoned, was it R3?
R3 or R4.
Yeah, something like that. Was not zoned, the lot was much larger than what the zoning was. But it was a perfect house to go into a bed and breakfast on there. It had plenty of ground around it. It was fine. And
Well, that might be the variance route, if you
I
got park
I
on
think-
3 sides. you know.
Variances
Uh,
are hard to, you know, I don't know that, I mean, you've got to prove a hardship. You're not going to prove a hardship. Variant, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, variance is pretty hard to prove, right? You
Yeah.
got to prove a
Yeah.
hardship, and it can't be financial, and it can't be
Correct.
self-imposed. So how is anybody going to prove a hardship in this? I mean, it's not a viable, true
Not
option for
viable.
somebody.
No, I mean, but,
Yeah.
you know, probably, especially for residential, and this is not going to be a residential, but most residential variances, they never meet the legal standards.
Right.
But commercial, usually, you know, most zoning boards are going to look at a commercial request a little more carefully than a residential request. And certainly if neighbors show up and are complaining, chances are they're not going to get it at all.
I think the style of the house is going to limit what becomes a bed and breakfast, because I think really, being realistic about it, most people would not set up a bed and breakfast in their house because there'd be nothing to draw people to their house unless you're doing something illicit. So, you know, you
But
need
Wayne
the
is so
style
charming.
of the house. I'm not suggesting that, you know, but
They're here for
being
Wayne, though.
truthful.
They're here for Wayne.
You
They're
know,
here
not
for-
Bryn Mawr, right?
They're not here for Arbordale or
Yeah, okay.
Atlee. They're
Right.
here for
We
Wayne.
won't
When you
talk
think
about
of like, I think of bed and breakfast I've stayed in. You know, I've stayed
They're
in
cute.
some in historic urban areas, and I've stayed in some on farms. But, you know, how do you?
I think-
the opportunities for bed and breakfast are so unique to a particular building. It's hard to say let's never have one in the R1.
Yeah, that's why, that was, I think, our original intention for not limiting it to a district. and just letting, we discussed it before, sort of generally, that the usage would limit what could be done there, or the ground would limit what could be done.
But I take Ed's point, we don't want this to be an excuse to be used for somebody who just wants to rent out a room in their house. So how do we prevent
So
that?
is there a way
14
to solve it?
days.
Can you apply
14
the
days.
acreage limits or size limits in certain districts so that you wouldn't have these things
How
in
could you?
typical neighborhoods? And in commercial districts, you're going to have some exceptions because you're
Why
going
don't
to
we leave commercial out of it? Because then they can go commercial, just have residential.
and restrict in the residential districts to a certain size.
Yeah. If it's half-acre property and you're renting out 2 rooms, so you need 2 more spots there, that really isn't going to increase in the neighborhood. But quite truthfully, what's going to draw people from out of town to a regular old brick 2-story colonial? Other than maybe a cheap room. Quite
Could be
truthfully.
cheaper, but could be just a room.
Yeah.
Again,
But-
if you're coming to Radnor and can't find, there's a lot of nights you can't find rooms around here. You're going to King of Prussia, you're going out to the Desmond and Great Valley, and suddenly somebody has business connections and you're bringing businessmen in for a couple months. It defeats the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here. I think. We're not trying to add rooms.
No,
You know,
no, we're trying, I think the purpose is
To provide the use.
to provide a
appropriate
secondary
places.
use or the ability to maintain a larger, older building. At least
Peter-
that's what I think.
Peter, let's back up a second, because we didn't talk about it at the beginning. The reason why this is in front of us was, a case that came into Radnor. What have you seen in other townships as far as restrictions go? Because obviously, you see what we're starting to struggle. The concept's nice until you
It
really
seemed
start
easy in the
thinking.
beginning until
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
got
I mean,
into the what ifs.
most other townships do have a minimum lot size that usually is larger than most of your residential lot sizes.
So larger than what would be an R1?
No, I
for
think an
instance?
acre is probably about average. And, they definitely do have parking requirements like you guys have listed for guests, residents, and employees. Many of them do have limits on the number of employees. Most of them do have the requirements that, look, the amenities are only available for the overnight guests. Most of them have limitations on what meals can be served. Because I think a lot of places, they don't want it to turn into a little miniature restaurant or that sort of, of thing. As far as where in the township, usually they're not allowed in your true high-density, residential districts. And in most townships, those are not historic areas. I mean, you're lucky enough that you have some high-density areas like Wayne that are somewhat historic that people might want to come to. But a lot of townships, where they were all farms, 20, 30, 40 years ago, those high-density residential are just, normal run-of-the-mill subdivisions. So who's going to want to go there? So they do usually limit it to, I think the areas that you guys outlined here, which is a more historic area or out in the country. And you don't see it in the more suburban areas.
Are you suggesting that you wouldn't allow it in R1 or 2 or 3?
Well, I believe the R1 is somewhat of a more rural area, right?
Okay. But not R2 or R3? Right? I mean, you just,
Yeah, I
in
think
other
it's
in
up
other
to you guys.
areas.
To be honest, you guys have a better idea of what's the housing stock.
The R1's not rural, it's pure suburbia.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it really kind of depends on the housing stock. I think most townships provide this for existing homes to allow people to have these larger homes to make them economically viable. Some places, attach it to, historic preservation. And so you have to have a historic house before you can even put one in. So, but yeah, usually most places don't allow it across the board everywhere. That would be unusual, I would say.
Is that leaning us to say, except in historic districts, and has to be a minimum 1 acre?
No, I think the agricultural districts are still up for grab. And I think that,
Well,
and I think
agricultural districts have
possibly
more than
the
1 acre.
R1, if you have a very large lot. Like
Bigger.
not the typical
R1
R1.
is 1 acre.
Right, but if you have a 4-acre lot in R1, that might be appropriate because you might have a big old mansion on it. But I think.
We should say
we would need
4-acre
to-
lot, right?
Or two
Say a
acres.
Or
4-acre lot.
2-acre, 3, whatever.
Right, so we would need to specify, I think what we need to do is to see another draft with the things we've talked about tonight, and then the contingencies we've talked about of limiting it to certain residential zones. And the ideas that I've heard so far are the historic district, where we're assuming that the parking requirement is going to be our,
Possible to meet, yeah.
you know, and if it does work, it works, great. Agricultural areas, and then we have to figure out which other residential zoning districts and how big those lots would need to be. I would personally think not 1 acre in the R1, because everybody's 1 acre in the R1. I would think you'd want something that's not typical. But I don't know how everyone else feels about that.
Yeah, but suppose in a subdivision that used to be 40 acre, let's say a mansion was 40 acres at one time, and they carved it up as they usually do, for example, in Verrari, or,
Fenimore.
you know, a lot of them. They saved a chunk of ground around the mansion of about an acre, maybe more,
It's usually more, but.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it could be an acre on there. And then, you know, you have the normal half acres or whatever around it, and then in the center you have this mansion sitting on maybe 1.5 acres. Would you limit that?
I would, because to plan for that particular building is going to be too specific. There's no way you can make that,
Well, that's
take
why-
every building in the township
No,
into.
you can't.
yeah.
You're tied in. That's why I
But I-
think if you're tying it in with the parking,
I
it would be
think you,
self-limiting.
I think you need the bigger lot because I think the neighbors don't want to live next to a bed and breakfast,
Yeah,
to be honest.
yeah, I think that's
Okay,
right.
so what are you saying, 2?
At
I'm
least,
saying I'd like the staff to look at what other standards
Okay.
are. I don't want to
Okay.
put a number out there because I haven't thought about it enough.
Yeah.
You know, the tricky part here is that we're not supposed to do spot zoning, and yet we're all.
doing it.
In our heads, you kind of think about, boy, that house would be great, this one wouldn't be. That house would be, and so how can we?
But thinking of examples is not spot zoning.
No, I know, kind of, in my head, it kind of is. I mean, I am thinking of particular places in trying to form the larger catch net that wouldn't be considered spot zoning. You're right, in R1,
And you're never going to get
an acre is
exactly-
inappropriate because we're all an acre or close to it. In R4, an acre would be fine, and in fact, I can think of a property in an R4 that has plenty of room. So that's, not that it's going to go this way, I'm just saying it's hard to not be thinking of particular properties,
But you're
but we have
thinking
to
of-
craft it in a way that that's not the case.
Well, you're thinking of what you'd like basically to plan for design in the future.
Exactly,
And that's
right.
not spot zoning.
Well, we aren't
I'm
really
not saying it is spot, I'm saying we're
rezoning. You're
thinking of spots.
doing a use. You're defining a use that can be.
and maybe we could look at R2 or R3 if they happen to have a 4-acre parcel that's zoned R2 or R3.
That's why you want to just pick it sounds
Pick
like
the
you need to
lot
pick
size.
acreage.
Pardon?
2
Is it
acres,
acres, or
3 acres,
as
4
Peter
acres.
said, it's an age? Is it a home built before?
No.
And it's 1930 or 1920, something that's clearly going to be,
But it also depends on how the style that it's built in, not necessarily the year it was built in.
okay.
Because my house was built in 1970, and if I were foolish enough, it would make a perfect bed and breakfast. But, it's not something that I would do particularly, but it still would be a great bed and
So
breakfast.
maybe we can have the staff look at add the language that we've added, and also look at what other townships have done as far as other restrictions, because you can see the struggle we're having. I think it's a good struggle, whether it's age or lot size or room size. Maybe there's one we're missing that would make this thing make sense and make it work without being too restrictive, but try to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. Does that make sense, Peter?
Yes, I think, be honest, most of the restrictions in here are what you're going to see in other townships. So, but
We don't
you
have
want
that
us to
here
look at the number of rooms, lot size.
Lot size.
And then other characteristics.
Anything else, whether it's age or style, it doesn't
Right.
sound like it would be right, but maybe there's something we're
Okay.
missing. Right.
Right.
And then within the lot size, if we think the lot size is the driver, let's look at each of the districts and see if what the staff may recommend is the right minimum within each district.
Okay.
Okay? Anything else?
I'd like to actually make one other minor comment, question. On one of the things, I was with a group that was trying to rewrite the plan institutional use thing, and one of the things that came up was parking. Would we consider, suppose one of these lovely old houses or whatever happened to be right along the township line, and they were able to satisfy the parking requirement with property which is over the township line in the adjacent township. Would we consider that?
The property would have to be merged.
You're saying their lot goes over the property?
Yeah.
Property line, the county line or the township line?
Yes.
But it's, well, that would be.
It's merged.
No, you can't do that because we can't control what happens in the other municipality. So if you have, they have this big house that's in Radnor, but all the properties is, next door. The problem is they could go to the township next door and apply to do something on the other property. We would have no way to stop them from doing that. And then all of a sudden this open area that we thought was going to be the lot, parking or whatever for the bed and breakfast is all of a sudden something else. So
But would that, if they did that, would that automatically revoke, if you will, the bed and breakfast, whatever it is?
no, certainly not automatically, because once the permit is issued, it's issued. And so unless they lie to us on the application, we couldn't pull it back. You could maybe try to issue it with conditions, but I mean, I've actually seen court cases where this has been discussed, and the courts have said, look, you're not allowed to include the property outside the municipality to try to meet those municipality zoning requirements because there's no control over it.
That makes perfect sense, but I just thought I'd ask the question.
Okay.
They came up with Villanova when they said, well, how much parking was supposed to be built across the county line in Lower Marion Township? Would that satisfy our parking requirement, even if they own the property? And the answer is no. Thank you.
Okay. So Sue, if you don't have all those, I'll email them to you in the morning, but we're going to ask staff to look at the restrictions in each of the zonings and add the comments we have, and then take another peek at it next month. Everybody in agreement? Any final comments? Any public comment?
Good evening, Sarah Pilling from Garrett Avenue. Let's say the grandparents come and stay in a bed and breakfast in Radnor Township, and they want their grandchild to come and have breakfast with them. Is that child not allowed to come because they're not an overnight guest? Or are we just going to look the other way? It's just another wrinkle into it.
I think we should send the police to arrest the child.
Well, so do I, but
And those grandparents.
It is another issue.
Right.
You've come from out of town. You'd like to have your family come and join you for breakfast.
I don't know that we can necessarily legislate for everything on
No,
there.
I don't either, but I'm
And,
just
you know,
bringing it
just-
up as another issue.
If we
I
have
don't
the
want a
power,
situation where you want your entire 50-member extended family to come for breakfast.
Well, that could be interesting, too.
I think it'd be better for the grandparents to go to the other family's residence for breakfast.
So we better write it in.
if we had the power to have all of the rules in this township followed,
Oh, well, my
then
dear.
student ordinances would not be an issue.
You're right.
Student housing wouldn't be an
You're
issue.
right. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah,
because
Good point. Okay.
It does,
There's always something.
yeah, there's always something. And if they're coming into town to visit family, if you make it too restrictive.
And what if there's a
Right.
family reunion at 5 bed and breakfasts and they pick one to have breakfast all together? I mean,
You can't stop that
Yeah,
if
you
a
can't
whole
stop.
family
There'll be a loophole
chooses,
no matter what.
comes in, all the sisters and the cousins and the aunts.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hi, Jim Schneller of St. David's Park. I live midway between a lot of R2s and a lot of downtown, and I think I have some constructive comments. I don't think, I'll keep it quick, I don't think that 14 is something that you should be afraid to lessen in I. Radnor has very peculiar problems, and at the moment, we've got a problem with traffic. And we've got a problem with being a hotel restaurant district. Do we want that? So limiting it to 7 days might be something, or 10 days might be something worth trying. I think that the experts might have some info about that, more particular for your use. Likewise, stacking. If you think of any neighborhood, if it's an R1 neighborhood, the ambiance of a neighborhood is going to really suffer if it's visible in many cases. Likewise, downtown, likewise in an R4, West Wayne Avenue. So I don't think stacking should be permitted. And one of the reasons is your police power to stop noise and pollution. If they're going to be moving things around every other day, say, at a low rate, that's a lot of doors opening and closing. That's a lot of extra pollution. I think it's a fascinating problem you're looking at with the age of the building and the neighborhoods where you might not want this to happen. And I think a solution would be, I'm thinking of Conestoga Road. It goes through R4, I think, and R2s coming from Ithan to Wayne. And some of those houses would be perfect, but you'd be limited with a strict zoning. How about giving it to Board of Commissioners under certain circumstances? Just having them, a final approval necessary from them in R2s and R3s. It might be a way. And frankly, I have passed bed and breakfast, maybe I'm dreaming, but it seems to me that some of these 60s and 70s ranchers are getting kind of nice. They're getting kind of cute in the right setting. It really comes down to the trees, and this, of course, comes down to the access. So as an example, Conestoga Road. One other thing was that I don't think you should use meals in D, in the current D and E, however you're rewording this. If you say meals, aren't you inviting dinners? And you're changing the character of the restaurant, of the bed and breakfast, to a hotel. I think that would be a crucial error. It would change who's invited, who feels invited, and the ordinance, too. I mean, you're broadening an ordinance you don't even want. So, good luck.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any final comments?
Peter, conditional use, would that be better, different, more power for the Board of Commissioners to take into consideration the neighbors, or same criteria? If they meet all of the criteria, then they can have their conditional use?
A special exception and conditional use are exactly the same, except for what body hears
Okay.
them.
So no difference in terms of the neighbors
No.
being able to express their concerns?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, with that said, we'll close this out. Any old business? Any new business? Any other public comment? Sir?
St. David's Park. I live really close to Eastern U, and the Board of Commissioners, I believe, gave a final approval or some kind of nod to the student center. But something very funny came up was the crossing. I don't know if it came up here, the crossing that currently exists to Cabrini. And there was a lot of head wagging about the fact that there should be one, and there was a lot of talk about the fact there shouldn't be one. But what seems to have made the decision was the fact that Eastern and Cabrini, or Eastern students, are crossing the street to smoke cigarettes. And, I didn't get up to talk because it seemed to be, kind of a messy issue. And they were looking at the big issue of the student center. But it seems to me that in the name of community spirit and sense and obvious college sense, if you just eliminate a crossing between the two universities, they're not going to drive. And they're going to have to, they'll end up forming a dirt path through the woods, even if there's 5 students a month who walk back and forth. So I was hoping you'd take a look at that when Cabrini comes before you, if it does, and encourage them to try to work something out. I think it's irresponsible to put up a brick wall, even if it is Eagle Road.
Can I respond to that? We talked about that of all places at the Shade Tree Commission. And
Really?
The reason that exists is that there was a time 10, 12, 15 years ago when Eastern and Cabrini worked together on summer programs, and it was necessary for the kids to go back and forth between the campuses. That cooperation ceased like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Eastern doesn't do anything to maintain it because it's right across from a parking lot. And Cabrini has no interest in continuing to maintain it for their own educational perspectives. Now, I certainly understand that with boys and girls on one side and boys and girls on the other side, especially at that age, you're going to have people crossing the road for other kinds of reasons. And
Well, I mean, all kinds of-
but they, they have made a decision, Cabrini has made a decision to close it simply because it no longer serves their educational purpose. Now, I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I'm just passing along what I heard.
I want your opinion, because it seems to me it's bad planning to just encourage them to get in cars. I mean, Cabrini's building the thing to make it a pedestrian campus.
Yes, they are. My only comment there is, if they're serious about making a connection between the two campuses, then somebody needs to put some kind of signal or some kind of lighting or something up there. I drive that road all the time, especially after I come home from choir on Thursday nights at 10 o'clock. And there have been more than one occasion I've had to apply my brakes rather quickly to avoid somebody. So if they're not going to, if they're going to do it, then we need to make a better crossing, a better marked crossing or something there. I mean,
If there were two
you wanted my opinion, that's my opinion.
Well, I'm thinking more generally, if there were 2 subdivisions being built, that would come into consideration, a sidewalk. If there were 2 malls being built, that would come into consideration. Nobody would be cutting off access from one or the other.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comment? I'll take a
move we
motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion adjourned. See you next month. Happy Halloween early.